Thank you. I'm Bob Lucas from the Economics Department. So a good deal of my work has been on international migration and the developing countries. I wanted to start by dispelling a couple of popular misconceptions about all of this. First, the idea that international migration proceeds mostly from low-income to high-income countries. In fact, 40%, I'm sorry, can we go to the next slide? In fact, 40% of the world's international migrants are in the developing countries. These are south-south moves from one developing country to another. The second misconception, that refugees are pouring into the US and Europe. In fact, 85% of the world's refugees are actually in the developing countries. I might slip in a little note here. The US actually ranks 56th amongst countries in refugees per capita. The third misconception is that ODA, that massive amounts of foreign aid can be used to stop immigration. But ODA is now less than half of total reported remittances, and reported remittances exclude informal remittances. Again, a footnote. US actually ranks 21st of the 23 DAC countries in terms of ODA relative to national income. And the fourth point, enforcing the US southern border has actually increased the stock of irregular migrants in the US. Next slide, please. So a few additional key features on this. Low education migrants rarely move to high-income countries, except from neighboring countries and to the GCC Gulf countries themselves. So circular migration of low-skilled workers has by far the biggest impact on poverty reduction at origin. The brain drain is partially offset by gain from an educated diaspora. It induces education at home, it increases trade, remittances are sent, and return migration may help with technology transfer. On the other hand, 80% of Chinese and Indian PhDs in science and engineering from the US universities remain in the US. Next slide, please. More recently, I've returned to my earlier work on rural-urban migration in developing regions. Almost all the developing countries report having policies to reduce or reverse rural-urban migration. Yet extreme poverty is localized in rural areas, and structural transformation of the economy requires rural-urban labor reallocation. Better educated folk are more likely to move into towns, except in Iran, yet migration is lowering skill levels in town. Job creation really needs to take this perspective into account. The gains to moving are very large, but minority communities and those in remote villages are unable to take advantage of this. Last slide, please. Return migration from town to rural areas is very common, especially where family were left in the village. Urbanization levels are rising, but reclassification of rural areas as urban is the principal source, not net rural-urban migration. Climate change is accelerating urbanization, but 60% of countries in Africa and Asia have no urban planning in place yet. So my current research is on seasonal migration as a strategy to offset food insecurity in 7 African countries.